We're in case anyone watching is wondering, we're eating chocolate-covered cacao nibs, which are really, really tasty.
Gotta also do this just little thing, like how far can I lean back and still be in the frame? Make sure.
I can. Yeah.
Let's see if I'm.
That was good.
Like I can like stand up a teeny bit, but I can't stand up too much. I can kind of slouch down. All right, cool. It's great position.
Yeah.
For example?
Yes?
Welcome to the Shaver Show. I'm Chris Shaver as usual, and today I'm here with David J, otherwise known as David J.
That's right.
David J is a fascinating thinker of many subjects, and pretty much any community you can think of. If it's not the Tea Party or the Ku Klux Klan, he's there somewhere, working out the details.
I've been trying to think about how to use community organizing methodologies to hack the Tea Party, because there's so many ways. If you look at the organizing structures they're using, there's so many ways that Tea Party, like the rank and file of the Tea Party, are really, really disempowered by their leadership.
Oh, yeah.
And if you were to just go in and create little mechanisms of empowerment for them, it would totally rip the Tea Party apart.
Well, yeah, and there's a desire there. There's some kind of a twisted desire in those communities that's motivated by things that can be identified, and that in a lot of ways I think that the people who are part of them aren't aware that they're motivated by. I think there's a dimension to a lot of mob communities, classic in history mob communities, and they're often very destructive.
Right.
Like, fascist communities and so forth, where people want something, they don't know what they want. Because they don't know what they want, it's their downfall. Mm-hmm. It's the reason why they're so motivated, and yet they can't bring themselves and their motivation to do something that's not self-sabotaging. Inarguably self-sabotaging from almost any historical perspective.
Not to hate on the Tea Party. Seriously, guys, we love you. You're great.
I don't do hatred. I just I'm like drinking tea right now.
Yeah, we're drinking tea.
I'm
Earl Grey. Hot.
Earl Grey high. Yeah. If anybody gets the reference, you're a better person because of it.
Yeah.
Or have a lot of free time.
So I'm so excited to be on the show.
I'm excited to have you on, because you're a person with so many interesting ideas and so many interesting subjects, and yet they're all tied together. They're all tied together by mechanisms that are actually at the core of the way that you investigate all of these different subjects, which I really like. I like when that happens. I like when you can look at all these different areas and be broadly associative about them.
So let me give. I guess I'll introduce myself and give a little bit of a story of, I think, what that perspective is that you're talking about. So, this feels really egotistical to say.
Go for it. I mean, we're making the internet happen.
Yeah, we are.
Have to be a little overconfident.
When I was 18, founded this community of people who don't experience sexual attraction, the asexual community. People who identify as asexual, which I've identified as asexual for most of my life. And there have been some really, really profound and powerful experiences that I've faced because of that have, I think, created this intellectual and now sort of professional perspective that I have. And
you're one of the few people I know who's legitimately created a new discourse.
Yeah. I mean, not by myself.
No,
by any means.
I'm not trying to
yeah, but so an asexual person is someone who doesn't experience sexual attraction. If you're curious about that community, check out asexuality.org. It sort of as the person who's created that, I've sort of had these interesting interlocking struggles in my life. One of those struggles has been sort of being the founder of a community and watching this huge discussion online. And eventually in the press and in academic discourse and sort of all these places that a new sexual orientation gets talked about, like watching this huge discourse balloon out of this thing that started as an idea in my head. And seeing how powerful it is, and also how that discourse, really sort of is not a validation of my own ego or of the idea that I originally started with has been totally steamrolled by now, and I'm just kind of riding this growing wave bubble and looking at how that process works and being fascinated by how powerful that is. And the other struggle that I've had that's sort of interlocking into that is the struggle to find intimacy in my life. because a lot of the way that we talk about intimacy in our society is really, really sexualized. And as someone that wants to be intimate with people but doesn't want sex, I kind of had to face this really difficult question of how do you talk about human connection if you're not talking about like making love? How do I practically go about doing that? And what I've sort of discovered in my own life is that process of community building, of like bringing together a bunch of people and a bunch of really close relationships around something that a lot of people find interesting and empowering, is also a really powerful way to create intimacy. And I've had these overlapping problems in my life. I've struggled with. On the one hand, how do I build community? On the other hand, how do I build intimacy? And how do those two strategies overlap and mingle all the time? And so now I'm in this place where, in my personal life, I do a lot of outreach to people and a lot of community building, and sort of I form intimate relationships based on my ability to do work with people around the passions that we share. And at the same time, professionally, I kind of am a community builder. I'm a consultant that works with a bunch of organizations that want to build communities, usually to create some change in the world. The most well-known client that I have is a group called Cradle to Cradle, that is a bunch of product designers all over the world that are trying to create sustainable products that can be completely recycled and used at the end of their life, and that want to have a big dialogue online and offline about that. And so a lot of the perspective that I bring tends to be about how do you think about relationships? How do you think about sort of discussions and communities as they evolve and come together? And what are new interesting ways that you can drive those things and make them happen? So that's kind of my lens, and I'm really excited to get to talk about that here.
Yeah, and what's so fascinating about it is, for you, these two struggles involve almost necessarily, because of the way that they function,
right,
you being acutely aware of what's going on around you while you're involved in it.
Yeah.
Which is something that's very difficult for most people, and that it's something that's almost a little taboo, to be aware of what's going on around you while you're kind of in the thick of it. But nevertheless, you have to do that, because that's a dimension you have to take into account of when you reason about relationships.
Yeah, it's interesting.
I'm getting into relationships with people. At the same time, I have to learn about what I'm doing as I'm doing it.
There's sort of this parallel consciousness. I think I first learned as a group facilitator because, and this is something that a lot of people can do, I think, who especially were trained as facilitators or trained in a couple of other teachers probably can do this well. Where like I'm talking to you, right? So I'm intellectually engaging with you, and part of my brain is focused on that. But there's also this thing that sits between us, which is a conversation. Mm-hmm. And that conversation sort of has a life of its own, and it has things that it wants, and it has ways that it can grow, and also things that will shut it down. And the life and maintenance of that being, and the evolution of that being, requires a totally different thought process than the intellectual discussion that we're having and the ideas that you're putting forth and how I'm engaging them. And I somehow have to have this parallel consciousness to engage both of those things at the same time, to grow the conversation while engaging your ideas. And I think the same is true with relationships. I wind up a lot of times feeling like, okay, I'm engaging with a person, and I'm feeling a lot of things about you as my friend, and I'm thinking about what we want to do together, and I'm having fun with you, and at the same time, there's sort of this interstitial, abstract, living, breathing entity between us that I've got to maintain and grow, that I've got to think strategically about how to maintain and grow.
And it's very much like a form of life, in that it sustains itself through the reproduction of the things that created.
Exactly,
and it exists it exists outside of the two people or many people who are involved in it. Mm-hmm. And so this has almost been one of your key objects of study, are these entities of betweenness. Mm-hmm. And it's something that, and we've discussed this before, is a little unintuitive for people to catch a grasp of what it means for there to be something like a positive entity that's not attached to any of the people involved in it. That's not, my entity, my relationship, or your relationship. It is the thing in and of itself in which we both are involved, or in which many people can be mutually involved in.
And this is what I found when I was, this kind of started when I was younger, and I was struggling with non-sexual intimacy. Because what I found is that I would have these very, very close relationships with people, these really close. What I wanted was to just, have people that loved me in my life, have people that I could depend on, right? It's a very natural thing. And I would get in these really close relationships where people would say that they really cared about me, but wouldn't be there for me in the way that I wanted people that really cared about me to be there for me. And they'd sort of be like, oh yeah, I'm your friend, I totally love you, I definitely want to be there for you, but if they got in a romantic relationship or if they got busy, like they would just sort of fall out of my life. And in the discourse of friendship, that's acceptable. It's cool to not see your friend for 4 months and then suddenly be friends again. And I had initially a really hard time understanding how that was the case. And then I realized that what they were saying was they said one thing they felt one thing about me and a different thing about our relationship. That they could really care about me and love me as a person, then I could really care about them and love them as a person, but that didn't mean that our relationship was something that we wanted to sort of maintain in the exact form that it had been before, or that we wanted to be able to depend on in the way that it had been there before. Like that relationship could like the state of that relationship, how much we were hanging out, could be really, really flexible. Well, what we felt about one another would stay the same. And I started thinking about, okay, there's this, like I can have different feelings about my relationship with someone and about the person, and they can have different feelings about their relationship with me and about me. And how do I think about and feel like how do I relate to this interstitial thing and think about the process of growing it?
And in a sense, it almost makes sense that people would have such trouble with that, disentangling it, because up to the moment in culture at large, there's no way of directly referring to that entity.
Yeah.
That constitutes the relationship between people as a thing in and of itself. Every attempt to refer to the entity is really done vicariously through the people involved in it. So if I say something about a relationship I have with somebody, I can only express it without some kind of a new discourse in terms of that person themselves, how I feel about that person.
Right. And there's this really interesting, I don't know if you've studied nonviolent communication at all.
I've read a little bit about it because it's weird. It has this weird situation within like computer scientists and stuff.
Yeah,
There's
totally.
a lot of them involved in it.
But nonviolent communication is a great example of that, where like there's this very explicit set of rules for what to me is talking about the relationship and not the person.
Yeah.
Like if I state feelings in this exact way and I state like requests in this exact way and I state other things in like a very specific framework, then I am making a statement about our relationship and not a statement about you, and so you shouldn't take it personally and get defensive.
Yeah.
Because our role if we have conflict is to collaborate around fixing our relationship rather than have conflict around one another. And you sort of frame things so that you're you're together peeling the plant in between you, the life form in between you, as opposed to, punching one another
or not. I mean, like or when two people find that their interests are incompatible with each other, there's a degree to which you'd be hard pressed to believe that that's necessarily a problem with either of the people involved, and yet that's the presupposition people make when there's an issue, when two friends can't see each other anymore, and they say, kind of in passing, we drift apart. There's always the presupposition that there's something beneath that we drifted apart, that's some act either done by one or the other, that's an act of violence that ended that relationship, and it wasn't, understandably, I think, or almost obviously, that people are different, so there's some situations in which two people can't form a relationship, and that doesn't take away from the fact that they might have respect for one another.
Exactly. And that's sort of what I found, is that there's an ebb and a flow in a life, and kind of a set of dynamics that exist around the flow of relationships that often have very little to do with the sense of value that people find in one another. And I found that there's a lot of situations, initially just in social interaction, but since then, kind of more broadly, that become a lot clearer when you think about them in terms of relationships as opposed to thinking about them in terms of interacting entities.